Covington here. Thank you for listening and for your interest in the State's Attorney's Office budget. I'm sorry that we had to do this separate audio presentation. I was hoping that we would be able to give a full presentation of our budget to the commissioners, even if only virtually, with enough time to do it justice. But as you saw, we were only given 5 minutes to present our funding needs for 2020. So I decided we should post something on our website to provide more details, and here we are. Now in this audio, I'm not going to bore you with a whole bunch of numbers. What you will hear is what plans I have for the use of your tax dollars that I've requested and how I arrived at that funding amount. Also, I hope that along the way you get a much better understanding of how the State's Attorney's Office actually operates. So here we go. My proposed 2021 budget seeks an increase over the 2020 fiscal year to help on 4 different fronts. First, the proposal includes funding for a conviction review unit designed to maximize the public's confidence in the criminal justice system. I've also proposed an increase in funding to help victims and witnesses cope with the criminal justice system they never asked to go through. Also, to increase our ability to fashion more appropriate dispositions in cases and help reduce cases that actually go through the court system. I've asked for funding to man a full-time diversion programs coordinator. Lastly, and any of you that have been following my seemingly hopeless struggle for adequate funding over the years will certainly not be surprised about my request for additional funding for regular line prosecutors to help with the caseload. Now let me talk briefly about each of those areas in a little bit more detail. First, State's Attorney's Office needs money for a full-time attorney and investigator for a conviction review unit. A CRU is essentially what the name implies. The unit's main function will be to review cases where an individual may have been erroneously convicted. As the Supreme Court has noted, the criminal justice system must always remember that all of the critical decisions in the system are made by human beings. So mistakes, though very rare, can and will be made. So we have to have some mechanism to identify the mistakes and fix them. And aside from doing the best investigation that can be done to prevent charging the wrong person in the first place, prosecutors need the ability to review cases where claims of actual innocence are made. In Charles County, we need an attorney whose sole responsibility is to review claims of erroneous convictions. That attorney, of course, will need an investigator to relook at the case, re-interview or interview for the first time witnesses, and run down any other newly discovered evidence in the case. Our citizens must be confident and believe that when someone is held accountable for a crime, that the system worked properly and convicted the right man. Without that belief, the whole system crumbles. Diversion is the next area I've targeted for additional resources. Over the centuries, we have learned that jail sentences are not always the most productive or effective way to deter and prevent crime. As a young prosecutor and defense attorney coming of age in the 90s, the true beginning of the so-called war on drugs, by the way, I certainly realized that jail alone was not the answer in every case. That is especially true for those defendants with addiction or mental health issues. Over the years, many different types of programs designed to divert individuals from the courts and jails have emerged. Charles County needs to take advantage of those. Not too many years back, Charles County did have a juvenile drug court program, which you could call a diversion program. As I recall, I was actually a part of the group of individuals from multiple agencies that helped design and set up that program. Unfortunately, the program fell by the wayside for reasons we do not have time to address here. But programs like that can be helpful, and we need to identify what diversion programs will be useful and implement them here in the county. Also, there are some programs that a prosecutor's office can run unilaterally. I hope to do that, but I gotta have the funding and manpower to do it. Programs don't organize or run themselves. So I have requested funding for a diversion program coordinator, someone to identify, set up, and run the diversion programs that will be most helpful and appropriate for our community and help protect our citizens from crime. Since I took my first oath as state's attorney back in 2011, I have worked diligently to improve the treatment and services for victims and witnesses vis-a-vis the criminal justice system. For instance, in 2011, we had 1 person in our office responsible for our victim witness assistance. Now, we have 6 people dedicated to that effort. One huge thing we have not been able to achieve, though, is consolidation of resources external to our office. One of my goals over the years has been to see a family justice center open here in Charles County. The center would act as a one-stop shop for victims and their families of sexual, physical, and domestic abuse. The center will bring together counselors from different agencies, prosecutors, and law enforcement. Other jurisdictions have these centers, and by all reports, the centers are a huge step forward for servicing victims. Charles County needs this improved functionality as well. Since the center would be a multi-agency venture, the question is who will take on the obligation of coordinating and bringing it into existence. The State's Attorney's Office is uniquely positioned in relation to victims of abuse because it is really the only office that is involved with the victims from start to finish of a case. My attorneys and victim witness assistance counselors are involved during the investigation of a case before charges are even filed. Obviously, once charges are filed, we are there for the prosecution of the entire case. But our assistance to victims does not end with sentencing. No, we monitor cases all the way through the prison sentence, a defendant's release, and up till the very last day of a defendant's parole or probation. Throughout the entire time, we are there protecting victims' rights and assisting them. We're there because that's our role under the law. Given our role in continuous interaction with victims, it makes sense that my office accepts the obligation to bring everyone together to stand up a family justice center. With that reality, I have asked for resources for a full-time family advocacy program coordinator who will act as liaison with all the stakeholders surrounding sexual, physical, and domestic abuse victims regarding daily operations, and also take the lead to develop a family justice center, which will be a multi-year project. Now, the programs I've described are not new by any stretch. For years, we have been trying to handle all of these functions as additional duties, if you will. But the workload just doesn't allow the time to accomplish these functions as well as we could. We need, and the community will greatly benefit from the additional manpower to devote to these efforts. It's impossible to handle these functions when we are drowning in caseloads. Now, I say that to make 2 points. First, I'd love to bring these programs to Charles County, but I have to have the manpower to do it. The second point is obvious. I need more attorneys to go into court and handle caseloads. I also asked for funding for that in my 2020 proposed budget. That leads me to our manning needs and how I've arrived at the numbers I've requested. Historically, the State's Attorney's Office has been understaffed. When I was first sworn in, we had fewer prosecutors than public defenders here in the county. Let me say that again. We had more public defenders than prosecutors. Anyone familiar with the criminal justice system knows how backwards that is. But that situation just epitomized how underfunded and understaffed our office was. Right now, the State's Attorney's Office is at about 80% of the manning we need. Our dedicated staff continues to do a great job keeping all the balls in the air. But every now and then, something does get dropped. And that simply comes from having too much to do in too little time. I've raised this with every board of commissioners since 2011, and to be fair, the State's Attorney's Office budget has increased significantly over the years, but we have never been close to the level we need to be. For instance, when I first came into office, I realized that we needed to double our number of attorneys from 10 to 20. Well, it's almost 10 years later, and we have, including me, 19 attorney positions. At first glance, that looks good, right? You'll say to me, come on, Covington, you say you needed 20 attorneys, you have 19. Quit complaining. Well, the problem is that the landscape has not remained the same since 2011. We now need 24 attorneys. That means we're 5 attorneys short. And don't forget the additional support staff to work with those attorneys. I guess being 20% short is better than being 50% short as we were 10 years ago. But that 20% shortage translates into a huge problem in day-to-day operations. And caseloads without adequate personnel to cover them has adversely impacted our ability to retain staff. It is one thing for personnel to leave for more money. It's quite another if they leave because the workload is oppressive compared to other offices in the state. Unfortunately, that is what we've had to deal with in the past 3 years. I said I wasn't going to bore you with numbers, but let me quickly explain how we calculate our manpower needs. The key number is 3. That is the ratio of attorneys to judges in the county. In order to service all the courtrooms in district and circuit court, I need 3 attorneys per judge. Now, where did I get this factoring number of 3? Well, it wasn't as easy as one might think. In short, I looked at all the state's attorney's offices in the state and compared certain numbers, like how many judges in the county, how many prosecutors they had, what was their overall caseload, what was their crime rate and violent crime rate. And I focused on counties that were good for comparison to Charles County, those with similar populations and number of judges. When we did our comparisons to other counties, I focused on violent crime rates and attorneys per judge. Unfortunately, Charles County had a very high violent crime rate and a very low prosecutor to judge ratio. On the other hand, it was very clear that those counties with higher prosecutor to judge ratios, that is 3.0 or higher, had relatively low violent crime rates. The violent crime rate is so important because that is the one number most folks, including me, look to when assessing the overall safety of a community. Now, many people surmise that the caseload of a prosecutor's office is the main determinant of manning levels. That is inaccurate. To me, the most important determinant of my manning is the number of judges in the county, because manning those courtrooms is the most important thing I have to do. Believe it or not, caseload is almost irrelevant. Let me give you a simple example to explain why I say that. First, you have to understand that the court has a limit on the number of cases it can and will process in a courtroom on any given day. I mean, everybody knows in whatever field you're talking about that only so much can get done per day. The courts are no different on that score. So let's say the case limit is 10 cases per day. Please note I'm making these numbers up for ease of calculation, all right? Now let's say our caseload is 30 cases. If there's only one judge in the county, then those 30 cases will have to be spread out over 3 days. 3 days of 10 cases per day covers all 30 cases. So I would only need attorneys to cover one courtroom on any given day. But what if there are 3 judges? Well, then the court would be able to handle all 30 cases, that is 10 cases before each judge, on one single day. For my office, the difference is clear. I will need attorneys to cover all 3 courtrooms on that single day. So this very simplistic example clearly shows that the need for manpower exists when there are more courtrooms or judges to cover. So a caseload has its impact. For me, the real determinant of my manning is the number of judges. I mentioned earlier that the landscape in Charles County had changed, thereby leaving us still short on manpower. That change has been the number of judges we have in the county. Back in 2011, we had 6 judges. Today, we have 8 judges. That's a 25% increase, and it has a huge impact on our manning levels. As we see, the prosecutors per judge is the most important factor determining our manning levels. So the question is then, what is the necessary ratio to adequately man the office? Well, since our research showed that having at least 3 prosecutors per judge correlates to significantly lower violent crime rates, that is the ratio we use. But please understand that 3 attorneys per judge is in no way the highest ratio we saw out there. We saw 3.4, we saw 3.6 ratios in the state. Ours at the time was 2.1, and today it's 2.4. Still a far cry from 3. A ratio of 3 would not put us at the front of the prosecutor's office in terms of manning, but it would at least get us to the pack. Right now, we are way behind similarly situated counties. So that's where the factoring number of 3 comes from. Simply put, in order to properly staff the courtrooms in Charles County and take care of all the out-of-court case preparation tasks, I need 3 attorneys for every judge in the county. And in order to properly support those attorneys, we need 1.5 support staff per attorney. So as I pointed out in the video presentation to the commissioners, our manning calculations are straightforward. We have 8 judges, 8 times 3 equals 24, so we need 24 attorneys. 24 attorneys times 1.5 support staff members equals 36, so we need 36 support staff to be fully manned. Right now, we have only 30 support staff. My 2021 budget request won't make my office the highest manned or the highest salaried prosecutor's office in the state. I do so because I recognize the state's attorney's office is not the only agency in the county that needs funding. I'm a reasonable guy. I understand the pie is only so big and everyone needs a share. But more important than that I can have an average manning number because I have amazingly talented and dedicated people in my office who have proven over and over again they are willing to work their tails off to achieve our mission. But how long can we ask them to do that? At some point, as we have seen over the past 3 years of employee turnover, the overwhelming caseload will predictably result in talented people leaving for offices that have reasonable caseloads. It isn't fair to my office, and it ultimately is a disservice to the citizens of the county who deserve a fully funded prosecutor's office. So in conclusion, let me thank you for listening, and I would greatly appreciate you letting your commissioners know how important public safety is to you by telling them to fully fund the state's attorney's office. Stay safe out there.